the legal system in the United States. Just so you know, I reserve the right to sit down and make fun of different decisions that come down because sometimes judges simply don't know what's going on as far as I'm concerned in the real world. Sometimes lawyers come up with these ridiculous lawsuits that mean nothing that for an intelligent person to believe in as you go through. I reserve the right to continually make fun of our legal system. That being said, I also believe we have one of the best legal systems on planet Earth. You know what? In the United States of America, we have the right to have a binding contract between two parties. If you don't agree with it, you can actually sue somebody and sit down there and make them adhere to the parts of the contract that you disagree with if they've been violating it. You know what? It's not that way in every single country on planet Earth. A lot of times, bribery and corruption almost rules over the rule of law. Here in the United States, we do all that we can to make certain that we do have a system that is ruled by law. And so it's imperfect because there's human beings involved with it. But as far as I'm concerned, we have a solid legal system. Now, that being said, human resources is often the people that really sit down and help guide an organization through all the different laws. Almost every law crosses over into human resources. You're going to have the business part of the organization or the fiscal part involved with contracts on construction, land, and property and everything else. But anything that has human beings involved with it, that's almost everything that deals with the law really is involved with human resources as you go through. I want to do a recitation, and you should already know this from high school in the process. There's three branches of government. On the federal basis, you have the legislative branch with the House of Representatives and the Senate. You also have something comparable here in California. You have the executive branch with the president and all the regulatory agencies. And by the way, the regulatory agencies don't pass laws. That's the legislative job to do. They pass regulations. That's what it's called, regulatory agencies. And then you have the courts on the federal level, the district courts, the appeals court, and the ultimate Supreme Court as you go through. The three branches, know them. It's probably going to be on a test. But that being said, you need to have your aspect figured out on that as well as to what these three are in the back of your head just to be in this country as you go through. By the way, you should probably actually know who your local politicians are for your House of Representatives and your Senate, just in case you ever wanted to have an impact on our country as you go through. Here's some of the laws you must know. This is the big one. Equal employment opportunity as you go through. This really goes back to what we call Title VII, called the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It's had a couple updates in the process as you go through, but the original act focused in on making certain there's equal employment opportunity regardless of race, color, religion, sex, age, disability, or national origin. Now, the original one really focused in on a couple of things. Now, we just had a couple changes as to how we define sex. Instead of saying it's two separate things, it's about sexual nature as the orientation. Now we cannot discriminate against that as well. And it was included in 2020 as you go through. That being said, pay attention to the whole process over here. This is the big deal. And it sets us aside from other countries as you go through. I might have mentioned, I have a friend of mine, she's a dual citizen of Egypt and the United States. On her driver's license it says she is a Christian. Oh my gosh, that would never happen in our country because of this law. We should not be able to hire somebody because of the fact, I think you're pretty good because you have this religious faith. That really is not, that when you hire somebody, it should be about whether or not they can do the job, yes or no. That's what it comes down to, not upon the fact that you have this certain set of values and I agree with that or I disagree with it. You should go through. So that being said, EO, there really is an organization, you must know the name of it, called the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. I've worked a lot with them. I've done probably about 14 different co-presentations with a person from Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, myself talking to an audience as you go through. So you have a whole series of things. This law plays a significant role in a lot of the different legal activities that come across in human resources as you go through. A couple of amendments. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery. The 14th is what we call the Equal Protection Clause. Make certain you know what that is. It provides protection for all citizens. It requires due process in any state action. It's a big deal because due process spills over into how you should be running your organization as you go through. Due process means that the person that is accused has an opportunity to sit down there and do several different activities. So we'll talk about that later on when it comes down to separation as you go through. 1963 Equal Pay Act, I mentioned before, Title VII as you go through, you'll see whenever you deal with federal law, the 7 is actually in Roman numerals. When you deal with California law, you'll see Arabic numerals as you go through. So here you'll see the VII or 7, okay, is actually a federal law as you go through. Title VII prohibits discrimination as you go through. You need to know about the National Labor Relations Act, the NLRA, that actually really does something today. It established an NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, which is a quasi-judicial agency, as we'll talk later on when we talk about unions. If they're going to have a union election, the NLRB, National Labor Relations Board, will be involved in that process you go through. Age Discrimination Act in Employment, 1967, it prohibits discrimination for those that are 40 years and older. In our society, as of this recording, this is by far the biggest area of discrimination in the United States. Is about age discrimination. It happens on a regular basis by employers. A lot of times talk about downsizing. The downsizing often ejects people with higher seniority and higher wages and brings in younger people as you go through. This area is being challenged an awful lot as you go through. You can see the ups and downs as you go through about the number of complaints in the process. And sometimes people just give up and they just retire as they go through and accept the fate of some employer getting rid of them due to age in the process. There also is a requirement that there's affirmative action for what we call people with disabilities in the Rehabilitation Act as you go through. Frankly, it's interesting how this was implemented. I recall going through, I had a bus driver and she was really short once upon a time. We actually dealt with this by actually having the mechanic strap 6-inch blocks on the gas pedal and the brake pedal so she could reach it and still drive a bus as you go through. It was almost humorous because she was super short, a lot of fun, a great bus driver, fabulous with the kids. She just couldn't reach the brakes or the gas pedal in the process. Sometimes with disabilities, it depends what you define that as. In this case, her stature was actually a problem as you go through. The Vietnam Era Readjustment Act, 1974, it really established the Vietnam vets as really a minority in the process as you go through. Thank goodness for that, because at that time, America was not in a good place for us. I was concerned. But that being said, this really addressed a serious national concern as you go through. We also have the Pregnancy Discrimination Act. You can't discriminate based upon pregnancy, childbirth, or related medical conditions. We've actually hired people at our college as you go through that literally are pregnant, 7 months in pregnancy. We hire them. They can't teach that semester because of the fact that they're going to deliver the child, but we hired them in the process and they're still employees as you go through. And then we have the Civil Rights Act of 1991. It really is the same as Title VII, but had some updates in the process. One of probably the most costliest ones that was ever passed was called the Americans with Disabilities Act. You know, nowadays, looking back in the scope of time, it costs so much money because cities, states, and counties had to sit down and comply, have ramps and everything else. Before this act, and it was awful, you would have a door to go into a store that was 32 inches. And if you had somebody in a wheelchair, they're trying to get a 29-inch wheelchair into a door frame that has 32 inches in it, and they have a whole 1.5 inches on each side to maybe rip their knuckles on the door as they go through. It was awful. They would come to a curb in a local city and they would drop their front wheels of their wheelchair down 4 inches, and then they'd try to go forward and then they'd drop the other one, jarring them both times. Frankly, this act over here did a couple things. Number one, almost nobody complained about it, primarily because we all hope that we get to be old. And sometimes when you get old, you have certain disabilities. The second part is it was pretty obvious when you sit down and have somebody struggling in the daily basics of life that you sit down and have some compassion to it. This was one of the smartest acts of Congress ever passed, in my opinion. Nobody fought it as you go through, but you must pay attention to it. There's a lot of detail in there, especially if you're running an organization. We'll talk more about that a little bit later. The punitive damages and the Civil Rights Act, here's some of the different aspects of it. You really do not want to get crosswise with a federal agency as you go through. Let me go back to the ADA. we went through and one time I had a college president and he really was not doing his work in the certain area. We had a quadriplegic person and she would show up at about 9 o'clock in the morning. She would park in the handicap spot. She didn't have an electric wheelchair. She had one on top of her car. She would reach out with her hand all crippled up. She'd pull the strap, the chair would gradually come down. She'd get into it. She'd wheel herself up and she had to sit down, park in front of a building because the 7 handicapped spaces by her workplace were already taken by people who sat down there and had also disability placards. You know, sometimes with disability placards where you get them, somebody hangs one up on their car and then you run into the building and you kind of wonder, gee, wonder what their disability is. She had a serious one. She would go into her office and the door would open, except the door would hit a desk and she was sitting down there trying to get her chair around a 30-inch wide thing. I measured it personally as you go through to get to her desk and everything else. It was a miserable work environment. You know what? Also, she wasn't a very pleasant person. That also is part of the attitude that was developed, except for the fact that we were not doing the right thing. I had to intervene as Vice Chancellor of Human Resources, gave clear direction to get her a parking space as she went through. She ended up filing a complaint with really the Civil Rights Commission as you went through, and that complaint set up a whole series of things. Yes, we fixed her situation, but in the meantime, we had another agency come out, and this American Disability Act, they came out already because she filed a complaint and they're following up on it. Even though I responded very quickly to them because they've already worked with federal agencies before, they went through, they saw our handicap ramp as he went through, and it had a 5% grade on it as they went through, and it was too much. It was supposed to be a 7% grade, making it easier as you went through. It cost us $275,000 for that one complaint, primarily because we had an unresponsive administration that didn't pay attention to the needs of an employee. Just one employee, but she was mad, and really people paid attention to it in the process. It costs an awful lot of money as you go through. Pay attention to the different acts. That is part of the job of human resources, and make certain when it's appropriate, you assert your authority in human resources to make certain things happen, because these things can cost serious amounts of money as you go through. Here's a couple executive orders as you go through that relate to it as well, about race, color, sex, religion, and so on. The EEOC is involved a lot of times in investigations and really looking for resolutions to the investigations. And to be frank with you, pay attention to what's going on. A lot of times the investigators, they're coming in, they have a case to solve and they're looking for a solution for it. Work with them on the solution if you think it's appropriate as you go through. Make certain that you have a pristine process that can sit down there and handle a good investigation as you go through. If you have a federal contract of $50,000 or more, okay, you also will have to sit down and pay attention to the Office of Federal Contract Compliance. That includes an affirmative action program. Even here in California, where twice the voters have rejected affirmative action in the state of California, if you have a federal contract of $50,000 or more, you must have an affirmative action program that really consists of a utilization analysis, goals and timetables, and specific action steps. And they're really looking for what we call the 4/5 rule. We'll talk more about that later on, where about pretty much 80% of your personnel resemble the clientele that you serve as you go through for overall racial ratios as you go through. We'll talk more about that later as you go through. The legal system in the United States, 3 branches of government. By the way, we're a republic, not a democracy, and that's a big deal in human resources. In a democracy, the majority rules. In a republic, the republic looks out for the rights of the individual, not for the rights of the majority. It's a big deal. Go back and check your civics lesson, read the Constitution if you want. Our country is not a democracy. We are a republic, and that is a key point when it comes to human resources, looking out for the rights of the individual as you go through. And we have a lot of laws based on that. Title VII, notice how it's notated here with the Roman numerals, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, amended in 1991, amended again really in 2011 as you go through, the National Labor Relations Act, the NLRA, the Age Discrimination Act, the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, the ADA, American Disability Act. You need to know all of these and then have an idea of the Rehabilitation Act and also the Pregnancy Discrimination Act as you go through. With that, HR is really a major area to administer all the laws and regulations at your organization. Take care.